Sorry.
No
How you
worries.
doing?
I'm tired on Mondays, and not because I hate my job. I just maybe it is because I hate my job, but I just wake up and I'm just drained every Monday. So I'm trying to think about what are the solutions or things going on.
Means you just crazy weekends?
No, yeah. I had to,
No.
go to sleep at 11.
All right. So you didn't have a good story. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's probably I'm
Yeah.
biking pretty heavily, so I'm wondering if my body's just like, yo, you need
You need
more
to calm
rest.
down. Yeah.
Yeah, or balancing the. I think it's just good to try to check in with ourselves to try to understand what's actually happening versus just like, oh, I'm tired. It's like
Yeah,
dial.
100%. That's good. Good to see you, man. It's been a long time.
It's been a while. How are you this Monday morning?
I'm good. I just got back from my siblings and I and my mom do an annual trip. So we just got back from our siblings' mom trip yesterday. So that was cool. So
Is it just the
yeah,
siblings or do the families go?
just the siblings.
What's that like?
It's cool. We went to Italy last year. This year was a little bit, we couldn't get schedules to work out. So we went to Chicago. So it's a little bit different than Italy. But yeah, it's cool. It's good. You don't get that much. I don't know. Have you ever read that Tim Urban, like thing about the rest of your life in 90 years or whatever? You know, that thing? Have you seen it?
Yeah, it's like
It's
how
like,
many days you actually spend with your parents is like basically none.
yeah, like after you're 18, you've spent like 90% of your time with your parents. So yeah, it's kind of like it's good opportunity. Even your siblings, so it's cool. It's a good time. We just eat our faces off and walk around and see different cities. So yeah, it's a good time. So
What do your parents like to do? What do you do with them?
uh, so my dad passed away a few years ago.
Sorry.
So yeah, so no, it's mostly sightseeing and eating. Yeah, I'd say like that's pretty much it. I think we might work in some wellness stuff in next year's, some yoga, some hiking, some stuff like that. But yeah, I think we have to, my mom's 73, so it can't be like, we went to like one hot spot. It might be too strong of a word, but it was definitely like a very, bougie dinner place. And, at like 10 o'clock, we were sitting down and my mom was definitely like, she's like, wow, people eat late and like, it's very loud in here, but she had a good time. I think it's like a good way. So yeah, it's good. But she's a, you know, traditional Indian immigrant mom. And so it's cool. She's still like seeing new stuff about this country, even though she's been here, for a long, long time. So it's cool. It's a lot of fun.
I love that you do that. That's inspiring. My parents are coming 3 weeks, and we're doing a similar thing, like just hanging out with them for the weekend.
Yeah.
I was feeling guilty this morning because I was like, "Can you guys leave Sunday morning like early?" And then I was like, "Why don't you try to let them stay longer? Like, how much time is appropriate with the?" And then I was curious, how do you think your kids are going to treat you when you're older? And I like the dynamic, by the way, that you go just with your siblings. You don't bring your significant others or kids. It's just you and the parent.
Yeah, we do that too separately. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I hope they see a good example. So, I mean, but ultimately they're going to see they're going to do what they do. But yeah, hopefully they like, I've seen a lot like the kids treat their parents the way their parents treated their kids. I've seen that a lot. So I'm like, all right, well, which seems, pretty obvious actually once you say it like that. But it's like, yeah, you just like your learned, your observed examples become your behavior, and yeah. So hopefully, but yeah, I don't have like it's not necessarily that's a consequence of hopefully doing these things. Like it's not, it's not an outcome, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I think uh, hopefully I just hope they like hanging out with me like when they're older. Like
Yeah.
that would be cool.
How do you balance? I'm single. Well, I'm not single. I'm dating, but
Yeah,
we're probably starting a family, God willing, and move in
nice,
all this stuff.
nice.
How do you balance? How do you balance that? How do you balance like doing your own life, taking care of your significant other, wife, and then the kids, and then also try to run a startup and business?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably not one that should be giving advice on stuff like this. Like uh, Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's ebbed and flowed, right? Like you know this well. Like there's the intense start period of a company, and like other things suffer as a result. And then now CB Insights is no longer have to worry about making payroll, so I can now I'm able to find a little bit more balance. But I mean, I still grind pretty hard. So uh, but I find, I think I find time. Like when the kids, I don't miss, there's certain things where I just won't miss stuff like the kids have, or if, the wife and I want to do stuff, we'll do it. But they know that like I'm still going to be grinding. So, but yeah, I don't know if I figured it out. I think I do take vacations with the kids solo. So
Just
that's
you and the
been,
kids.
yeah, they're in different schools. So we'll like their spring breaks are in weird time, like not the same time.
Oh, just
And
one at a
so
time. You'll take them.
yeah, so I'll take one at a time. So those have actually been pretty tremendous. Like we just my daughter and I just went to Costa Rica. My son, who's younger, like likes history, so we just went to Boston. And like, yeah, I mean, that's those I think are going to be the things that I know I'll remember. I think they'll hopefully remember that stuff too. So but
Yeah.
yeah, still figuring it out for sure.
What is how hard is grinding hard? What does that look like? Because I do these videos sometimes on YouTube, and it's like, yeah, to be rich, you just work hard. And every time people say that, I'm like, what? How is hard? What is hard work to you? What does grinding hard look like? So people know what the levels are at.
Um, I mean, I think in the beginning it was honestly it was just hours. Like if I'm being candid, it was like because there was a lot to do, and like, we were a data company, and so there was always just like more data to get, right? And like we didn't have all these engineers and smart people that we have today, so it was a lot of like just ground and pound, like go get the data, go send in 100 emails to prospective customers. Like it was like your output was very correlated to your inputs. um, I think it's less so now, but yeah, I'm still working a fair number of hours, and if I'm not working, like I'm scheming, right? Like like even if I'm not like at the keyboard, I'm always like, all right, I'm thinking like if I'm walking somewhere, like it's still on my brain. So that might still not be considered, that's not maybe what people might call traditionally work, but yeah, I'm scheming like unless I'm with my wife or kids, I'm like 100% scheming all the time.
For the people that don't know CB Insights, how do you describe it?
Yeah, it's evolved quite a bit. It's We think of it today as a marketplace. So we sell to enterprises, investors, corp dev teams, and then on the other side we have technology companies, and we connect those two. So we connect them to data that the technology companies give us, to information we extract from the public web, and then we also interview buyers of software and give them access to all of the insights of those software buyers. And so, yeah, the goal is to help them make quicker, faster technology decisions, whether you're an IT team, whether you're a venture team, or whether you're a corp M&A team.
I think what's interesting, for the audience, and I think I want to kind of go from where it started to where that evolved to. Because like, what was
Yeah,
the
yeah.
original premise? I thought was like you have data and you sell it to VCs.
Yeah, 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 it does. Yeah, I worked in venture before, so it was like, hey, we have data on private companies, and you can buy a subscription. And so, yeah, that's very much where it started. I think the last time I saw you in person was like in New York. You were running like something, I don't know, some like meetup or something, and like that's very much what we were. Yeah, I mean, over time we were bootstrapped for the first 6 years, so you sort of follow the money, right, when you're bootstrapped. Uh, and so I thought we'd sell to VCs and M&A teams, and then all these enterprises started signing up, and we were like, who are you? Like we don't. They would close really quick. They'd pay us more, and it's like the dream customer, right? But we didn't really understand their use case, and they're like, oh, we're from digital transformation, or we're from IT, or we're from the wealth management team at Big Bank X, and we're using you to see where technology is going and to figure out who our vendors of the future are going to be. And we're like, oh, like that's interesting, right? And so you sort of pull on that thread and you realize like, oh, there's a lot of people who do that at these really giant companies, and they have a mandate to use technology to lower costs or get to grow faster. And the world is no longer, IBM, Oracle, Microsoft. It's the world you and I have been living in. It's like thousands of best of breed SaaS companies and just technology companies, and they like, yeah, they're not equipped for that world, and we help them figure that out. So yeah, it's kind of been the evolution over time. And then the big thing that sort of changed was companies started wanting to give us information. So we have this newsletter, which sort of sputtered along and was growing. And then eventually it kind of got critical mass. And then companies were like, hey, I want to be in your report. I want to be in your market map. And we said, sure, we're not going to charge you anything, but you got to, you got to do what we call an analyst briefing. You got to give us some information about you that's not publicly available. Like, who are your customers? What's your price point? Like why your product beats X, Y, and Z. And they were like, okay, if that's the trade, like, we're happy to do that. And so now we get thousands of companies submitting this sort of proprietary info to us. And so we've got this interesting kind of like, you know, off the grid data set that like companies give to us. And then we started talking to their customers and interviewing them about what do you like, what don't you like about these products. And, now we've got this like big qualitative data set as well.
So a few things back, how'd you get your first customer? And what was that? How'd you have the idea and how'd you get your first customer originally?
So idea was I worked in venture and M&A, and I hated the products that we had to use. I always felt like I was still going to Google to find information. And I'm like, well, if I paid, $20,000 for the subscription, why is my team having to go to Google? So that was, the genesis of the idea. Candidly, like, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. So like I'd looked at buying Subway franchises and, art framing business. So like, I don't know if I
Really?
necessarily cared that much about the problem as much as like I'm just going to go start something. But this one actually like was good in that like I'd felt the pain firsthand. So that was that was the genesis. And then honestly it was just content marketing. So we loved what was that dating site, OK Cupid, back in the day, right?
Yeah.
Remember they had this dating blog, and they used to
Yeah,
take data, and it was awesome, right? And so it was like, okay. And then there was 538, which was by Nate Silver, the
yeah.
politics guy. And we're like, tech is actually a lot like politics. It's like a lot of talking heads who have strong opinions, but there's not a lot of data. And we were like, oh, maybe we could like kind of take the irreverence of OK Cupid, take the data driven thing of both, and like start doing content marketing. And we put that out there into the ether, shared it with media, journalists, and then you would say, hey, listen, you get the report, just link to us. And then, somebody would see a link in the Wall Street Journal or New York Times or wherever, and they'd be like, hey, what's the CB Insights thing? And then free trial on this, and then the landing page and, all the CTAs and all that good stuff. And yeah, we just call them up and be like, hey, we got this thing. And, early days, it was like $495 a month. Now, we're at around, let's call it a 50K annual contract value. So
Wow.
it's changed. As the customers evolved and offerings gotten better, it's changed. But yeah, it was just that was that I talked about earlier, that ground and pound. Like, the more calls, the more emails, the more demos you did every day, the more you got to ring the register. So that's all we did in the beginning, and that's all I did in the beginning. And then eventually got lucky and hired some people who kind of helped scale things, way beyond the few folks that started it.
One I'm curious on that. Like at AppSumo, when I started AppSumo.com, it was startup people in Silicon Valley, maybe New York, that liked these products and just wanted a better price on them. And I could help these products do their marketing. And that's evolved where our recent avatar customer that we're serving was a marketing agency. So like a solopreneur, 1-2 person team doing like marketing work for businesses, mostly almost all online. So I'm curious, and a lot of people are struggling with this. How did you figure out which customers to follow and which ones to ignore? Because it was interesting. You're like, hey, we did VCs, but then we had these people knocking. And I think what I've noticed in business and marketing is like, how do I follow the behavior that people are already exhibiting, not having to
Yeah.
convince them? So
Yeah,
is there people
100%.
you ignored, by the way, as well as the ones you've listened to? And I'm curious to hear a little bit more of that evolution for you
Yeah,
guys.
yeah. I mean, in the beginning, when you're bootstrapped or revenue funded, I prefer. Like, we were super
Revenue
promiscuous,
funded. You were
right?
what?
Like, promiscuous, right? Like when it came to who our customer was, right? It's like, if you had money and could close relatively quickly, right, we would take your money, right? Over time, what we realized, so a good example of that, we sold to some individual angel investors in the early days, like, because they were like, oh, 495 a month, we can handle that. the challenge was that those were people who weren't used to using data in their workflow. And so they would be blowing up our chat all the time with like support requests, right? They're like, oh, like, what does this mean? Or like, you missed this deal about, that I did. It was like a 20K check. And it was like, well, that was, nobody has that information. And so we realized over time that there was certain customers who like required a lot more support. And I remember going, I was at this conference with a consulting, I met this consulting company, and this guy was like, I need you to add 2 zeros to your price. And I was like, what? Like, slow down, what's going on? And he's like, I don't want to be in line. I don't want to be behind the guy who's paying you $4.95 a month when I need help. And I was like, oh, all right. Like support is another dimension that people will, I always thought it was just like the product. And then I was like, oh, support's this other vector that people will pay us on. And uh, so that was kind of eye opening, I would say, for sure. Right. And so over time, and then as the business stabilized, we realized, okay, like that kind of prosumery use case isn't where we're going to go. And we're going to focus on, enterprises, investors, and we still have universities and economic development groups and other folks, but that's not the lion's share is now like we zoned in on. But I'd say in the beginning, it's just you're trying to make money, and so like you just take what you can get, and then over time you have the luxury of kind of narrowing in. So it wasn't, yeah, we weren't super disciplined in the beginning. It was just like, hey, just like somebody's willing to pay us, and you can give them a Stripe link, like go get it.
What would you recommend for other entrepreneurs about identifying the right customer segment to prioritize or focus on?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if I look at the biggest mistakes I've made have been of lack of focus, right? And so I would say if I had any do overs, it was lack of focus on the product, lack of focus on who the customer was, and so I think niching down and figuring out, okay, I'm just going to build something that's tailor made and exceptional for this one kind of persona. And then once I knock that down, I have a vision of what other personas this might apply to, and I'll just keep knocking those bowling pins down over time. I think, if I had the discipline back in the day, I would have done it that way. I didn't. But yeah, I think like kind of increasing the quality, narrowing the scope is like generally, I would say, good is a good thing to do. But it helped us find maybe product market fit. But I think if we'd been a little bit rigorous, we could have said, hey, there's a lot of X persona. Let's go and build something really tailor made for them. Go crack that nut, and then we'll go after the next one. So yeah, in product, in marketing, and in our ideal customer profile, I wish I'd been more disciplined at times for sure, and just like narrowed in on somebody with a little bit more focus.
Have you ever over focused? And what I mean by that is like at AppSumo this year, our focus is like new buyers. Like let's expand the pie of people that are solopreneurs and reach out to them and appeal to them. And this morning, I get a comment that's like, hey, we're missing out on sessions, which is the overall traffic to the business. And it's like, well, we're focused on new buyers. It's like, you want to focus on two things? And so it's kind of an interesting, it's not to say either wrong or right, but then, there's always trade-offs to be mindful of when you're making a focus or a decision.
Yeah. I don't know I don't think we've been over focused. It's actually a thing that I'm trying to emphasize even more now in the company is like ruthless prioritization. I don't know if we've never gotten it down to one thing, right? But I think like sometimes you'll ask folks, and you myself included, like, hey, what are your priorities? And you list like 10. And it's like, if you have 10 priorities, you have no priorities, right? And so this year, like we've got sort of, 4 kind of key priorities, right? And so that's what we're focused on. As a company gets bigger, I think it's really valuable because if it's not one of those things, everybody knows like, okay, we shouldn't work on that, right? Because otherwise, like it's easy, and I'm guilty of this. Like I get attracted to sort of the shiny object. Um, and so now for me, it's like, okay, hey, it doesn't actually solve one of those 4 priorities we have. Like we can't do it. So I think that in that sense, it's been good as the company's gotten bigger to narrow in on like what are the key priorities and really thinking through those. And then if it's not part of those, like you just don't do it. And it gives a lot of clarity, not just to other leaders, but like their people in their org. So yeah, I'm a big fan of focus. I mean, I guess if you focus on the wrong thing, yeah, that could be kind of lethal. But hopefully, if we've done our analysis right and picked like the big, I think the thing is like you got to think of something that even if we're wrong, it could still be lucrative or it could still be valuable, right? So like maybe we think it's going to be worth 100, but if we're wrong by half and we end up with an outcome of 50, that would still be meaningful to the biz, right? If it's like, hey, like it's only valuable if we perfectly execute this, then like that's a problem, right? So, but yeah,
Yeah, that's a good
I think we're getting better at that.
No, it's one of these things in life. No one thinks people are minimalists. Everyone's focused, but then you talk to them and you're like, that actually, and I wrote down for my own self, like we have a top 3 in our company and we kind of revisit it and we do talk about it and we check status, but I don't think it really is implying to everybody else, like these are the 3, right? I think it's like, oh, those are 3. And can you share your priorities?
Let me see which one I can share. Yeah, so we have one I'll talk about. So we have like this, kind of like what's fashionable, like a product led growth, the PLG motion, right? And so we have a bunch of customers who are like smaller corporations or smaller investment firms who we've kind of priced out of using CBI, right? And I'd get emails in response to the newsletter, and somebody was like, "Listen, I have $10,000. Can you send me a payment link, and can I buy one seat?" And for a bunch of years, we were like, "No, that's not our model. We can't support that, all this stuff." And so like last year, I was like, "Okay, just for kind of shits and giggles, let me see if we can do that, right?" And the process, because there's all this like machinery behind the scenes, was like, you got to set up this instance in Salesforce and you got to get a contract. And it was like, you would think we were like SpaceX trying to put somebody on the moon to get this person's $10,000. And it was like, okay, there's enough demand here. And we kind of sized the market and we said, okay, there's, X tens of thousands of firms that we think could be prospective customers, but just that aren't because of our pricing and our structure. And we're not equipped to service them, support them in our current way. And we said, okay, like we're gonna go actually not seed that part of the market and go after it, right? And so we had to build like a e-commerce enabled kind of seat, and we had to figure out who's in and who's out. And then there's a bunch of like routing, somebody comes in from a bigger customer, but who found that like they're not actually they're actually not able to avail themselves of that pricing, right? Like that's only for a certain size customer, right? And so like there's still this machinery behind the scenes that has to be created, and so that's a big priority for us. And so yeah, like that's been something that like we've got somebody on the executive leadership team who owns that. We've got specific goals around how much revenue that's going to drive, and then like at every leadership team meeting or every kind of, let's say, third leadership team meeting, they're doing a readout on like, here's what's going well, here's what's not going well, here's what I'm going to do. But it's the status report's interesting. The most interesting part is, if it's going well, what am I going to double down on? If it's not going well, what am I doing to fix it? Right? Because that's like, like the status reports, it is what it is. It's like, but okay, what's your plan? Like if we're off track, what are we doing? Is it a conversion rate problem? Is it a pricing problem? Is it a whatever the challenge is? Like you got to get into the weeds. So I think that's been, yeah. And so that's like an example of one, and then how we sort of are trying to drive discipline around how we manage it and get to an outcome. And the reality is like it's early days. I want to just launch, but maybe 6 months in, we're like, oh, this was a bad bet, right? Like, but like if we've done if the inputs have been good, then we are like, okay, at least we made the right decisions along the way, and maybe we got to go revisit like why was our thinking flawed on this? Like what did we miss? But yeah, like the key is like we were constantly making progress, or like that's the hope.
How did you figure out what to prioritize? And can you share the other ones maybe broadly? And then
Yeah,
I'm interested in how you got to the decision.
yeah. So what typically will happen is we said we have kind of three financial priorities for the year, right? Or like we wanted to increase our ARR, our new ARR, we wanted to increase gross retention, and then we wanted to drive up margin, right? Like those are our three kind of financial metric outcomes we wanted. And so every initiative that was going to be a priority had to ladder up to one of those. So if you can't show that's going to help one of those, like immediately it's excluded.
It couldn't ladder up to revenue. Sorry, one more time.
Yeah, revenue. Yeah, new ARR, so new annual recurring revenue. So yeah, absolutely. And so one, it was there, right? And so what that ends up doing is it ends up getting rid of lots of science projects on the product side, right? It's like, oh, this wouldn't it, like the most painful things to have built in retrospect started with, wouldn't it be cool if, right? Because it was like, oh yeah, that'd be cool, and then nobody really wants to pay for that, right?
Dude, it's
And
so hard. Also, if you kind of start talking about it and then people are already committed to it, and as a leader, you're like, you have to kill or pull back. It's tough. That's been
yeah,
really challenging.
yeah, it's and the thing is, like if you've hired good people, like as I mentioned, you have and we have, is like there's actually very few bad ideas, right? But there's good ideas, and then there's like exceptional ideas, and you basically have to say no to all the good ideas and only focus on the exceptional ones. So we figured out these kind of key financial, metrics, operating metrics we wanted to focus on, and then everybody kind of comes with, everybody meaning on the leadership team comes with, okay, here's what I think can drive those, and then it's sort of like it's a productive sort of battle royale, right? For like, which idea is the best, right? And so like that is based on, really based on the quality of your thinking and the quality of your preparation, right? And so like good ideas are those that come with a set of facts and information. Bad ideas are like, oh, Noah and I agree that this would be good, right? Like that's not good, right? A bad idea is whoever is the hot company in Silicon Valley is doing it, right? Like, don't give a shit, right? Like, why is it relevant in our context, and why will we be successful with it? So, like there's a way of presenting ideas that does better at CBI than some other ways. And yeah, if you bring facts and information to your case, and then yeah, we kind of like pick from amongst those, and then that became our priorities at the start of the year. And we'll see, we'll revisit them, and we kind of stage gate them. So if things are going well and they need more resources, they get more resources. If they're not going well, then hey, like what's your plan to fix it? And if they're like off the cliff bad, then it's like, okay, it's like time to like cut bait on this and go pursue something else. So that's that's kind of like the rough methodology, right? Like planning's, that's like an art. It's like we get some stuff right and we get a bunch wrong. And I would say like this is probably our first year this is the best year of planning we've done. But like, historically that's certainly been an area of opportunity for us.
How do you know it's the best, and what did you do differently this year than the past?
So one, I think we got ahead of it. Like we weren't, like often we were like kind of building the plane and flying it at the same time, right? Like we're in the new year and we're still like figuring out the priorities, right? Which is like, you can't, that's just not, then we're like 4 months in or 5 months in and we've just figured out the priorities. And it's like, now we only have half a year to actually go action them. So one, I think we got ahead of them. Two, I think we had sort of this, we'll call it like an idea meritocracy, in terms of like everybody bring your ideas and we'll go through and hash through them. And then I think three is we gave individual ownership to each priority, right? Like there's somebody on the leadership team who's responsible for it, right? And so, because I think in the past sometimes we've had sort of like this jump ball, right, where it was like it wasn't clear who owned it, right? And so like if you have unclear ownership, it's like, well, everybody's doing whatever they think they should do, but it's like nobody's actually the quarterback, and you need somebody to be the quarterback who's kind of calling the shots on it. I'd say those three have probably been the things that have made it good. The best thing though is that like that idea meritocracy part is like actually seeing ideas and saying like good, no good, and like, or come back with this. I think like that's big.
I like the ownership. I definitely resonate with. The thing I wrote down is that we're having like a H2 summit planning Wednesday, and like what you said about revenue focused ideas. So it's like, here's the targets I care about. That gives you the structure for thinking about the ideas and bringing data related to that. I think otherwise, potentially, I would speak for us, it's a little open ended.
Yeah, we had that exact thing, right? It was just like, yeah, because yeah, then it was just like they're all good ideas, but it's like to what end, right? And I think by giving folks those priorities, it also it's it's kind of like when you ask somebody like, "Hey, do you want to go to dinner?" Like, and it's just like totally open ended, right? Versus like, "Hey, like, you want to go out to this neighborhood and get this or this." Like, now it's just much easier for people to like kind of paint within those lines. And so now when we said like, hey, ARR growth, retention, gross margin, like it was like, okay, I can get behind that, right? Like I know what's inbounds and what's out of bounds pretty quickly. And so I think actually the first set of ideas that we ended up discussing were of a higher quality because they all had to ultimately like be additive to one of those priorities, right? It wasn't like, hey, I care about like, some random like thing. And it was like, no, 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 walk it back. Like, how's it going to drive one of those three? And if they couldn't, it was like, okay, well then like go back to the drawing board, right? Like we can't,
I
we
like
can't spend
that.
time on that.
You said your top metrics was like ARR, margin,
And retention.
retention. I might copy it. I'll do like CVNs. That's a good idea.
All right.
I'm just gonna put that. I like that. One thing I'm wondering many things on it, and it's Anon,
Anand.
Anand, because I'm so used to Adnan. And this morning I'm going for a walk. I'm like, it's Adnan. No, it's Anand. Anand.
Yeah. Anand.
Anand.
Yep.
Okay. Um, what did you do to level up your leadership? Like, who did you have around you? What did you consume? Where did you learn all this from? And more specific stuff, the better for selfishly for me, and then maybe the audience will benefit too.
Yeah. I don't, again, like it's evolved, right? So like, like and I don't know if these are universal rules. I think sometimes like startup land, people talk about them like they are. Like the person who's good from 1 to 2 won't be good from 2 to 4, won't be good from 4 to 8. And like, I don't think that there's these like they're not these like laws of physics that are universally true. But I think like I have seen that like sometimes the person who's great at one stage isn't great at the next stage, right? And so I don't know if you've ever seen that. There's this framework, settlers, town planners, pioneers, settlers, town planners, right? And it's like, settlers are like the first people who like, they're like, or sorry, pioneers are the people who like forage a new path and find the thing and make it work, right? And then the settlers come in and set up systems, and the town planners like help it like grow and flourish. And so, I'd say like roughly that's been my experience. Like there's just different stages of company growth. And so you have to make sure that the people that you have at the leadership team have been people that are good for that stage of growth, including myself, right? Like there may be a point at which I am not the right person for CB Insights because like it's outgrown my skills. I still like to believe that I have something to offer, so I'm still here. The thing I think we've looked for is where the mistakes I've made have been where somebody is, if we're at stage N, we look for people who've seen growth at the N+1, max N+2 from us, right? So like if somebody's from Salesforce or Oracle, like they're not going to be able to hang at CBI. And it's not anything about a deficiency in them. It's just that our entropy level is too high, right? And like there's just, and the business card doesn't do as much of the heavy lifting, like the name on the business card, right? Like I remember when I was at American Express, like everybody would call me back, right? And like in the moment, you're like, oh, that's because they think Anand's like dope, right? And then you realize like no, they just care about American Express, right? And so when I left, all those people who I thought would be like super helpful didn't return my calls, right? And that was like, oh, that was because the logo on the business card did most of the work. And so we're a challenger brand. So I think the one thing we look for is, people who are sort of stage appropriate. They've seen maybe the next level or 2 levels up. That's been big. I think anytime we've made mistakes has been hiring people who've been just too many stages removed. And then in the hiring process, I think we've gotten better there. We with the leadership team, it's like we always do like a case study, right? Like, and not like a McKinsey, like, how many gumballs can you fit in a 747 kind of case, like a, hey, here's some data on our company. Sometimes we like make it illustrative, so it's not real data. And we say like, hey, and here's the problem, and here's your prompts, right? And come in, and you're gonna sit down with me and a couple members of the leadership team, and we're just gonna like talk through it the way we talk through like any problem that we're having. And in those sessions, I'll sometimes, even if I agree with them, just take the counterpoint just to see how we disagree, right? And so that's been really good because you can actually see how good somebody is at like thinking about things in our context and actually being able to push back how they work in our sort of setting, right? Do they go above and beyond in that case? And that's like the end of our process. So that's been really good because if you don't do well in that, like, and there's been times where I've gone against my instinct and somebody's output there and I've still hired them, and like, 100%, those people haven't worked out. So that's been really good. And then references, which is a weird, maybe seems trite. Like I take those incredibly seriously. So for anybody on the leadership team, like I do them myself, and I'm basically looking for reasons, candidly, not to hire the person, even though they're very far along in that process. Like if I don't see high conviction by the references, I usually ask like, hey, you've worked with X, other people like this in your history. Like, where does, ABC person stack up? And if they don't say like they're the best person I've ever worked with in that role, right? Like that's usually like, that means like, then it's not a definite out, but like I'm going to push on that now with the next reference. So those have been like the case study and references at the leadership team level. And then, yeah, just kind of like knowing when somebody is maybe when the company's outgrown them uh, is important. That's really, I would say that's the most agonizing kind of thing because they're somebody that you've like personally grown to like a lot, and they've done great things for the business, but the business has gotten too big for them, and so you got to find a way to. And some people see it and they're like, oh no, I'm a 10 to $20 million person. Like that's what I love, and they're just self aware. But a lot of people aren't, and then like that's a hard conversation, and got to find a way to sort of respect their contribution, but also find a way to like say like, hey, listen, like for us to go from 20 to 40 or 40 to 80 or 80 to 160, like, like this isn't a fit. Those conversations are challenging and sometimes difficult.
Any books or advisors that you've had or courses that you've benefited from in learning organization, leadership, management?
Yeah, there's a book called, I'm forgetting, I think it's called The Manager's Handbook. I'll send it to you afterwards. I should know this. I found that book to be really good. And actually the book that has like, it's not a management book, but the book that's had the most impact on me from a business perspective is The Goal by this guy named Eliyahu Goldratt.
Wow, okay. Tell me more why you like that.
Yeah. So that book is like, it's the weirdest business book I've ever read because it's written as like a fiction book, right? So it's kind of like, this story and this guy and, all this stuff. But like, it's just a systems book, and it like just talks about like in any system, the challenge, like there's one constraint that's restricting you from achieving what you want. And like, you have to focus on solving that constraint. And once you solve that, the constraint will move elsewhere is sort of the summary of it. But that book has been like, I would say, transformational for me in terms of thinking about like, yeah, like the business is a system and how do you break it down into systems. So yeah, I love that book. I've read that like multiple times, and I think it's weird. It's weird because it's written as a fiction book, but it's really, really good.
I've read that one, and I the first time I've only read it once, and I was like, it felt more like operational research, like how do you be efficient at the company, and then what's the bottleneck holding back the other bottlenecks? I think was the major takeaway. What did you take away for your?
That's what I took away. But I think everything's a funnel, right? Like in a company, like you're trying to hire, it's a funnel. You're trying to market, it's a funnel. Sales is a funnel. Engineering is a funnel. I got a lot of, so like we'd always talk about like on the product side, it was like, oh, like, there's all these ideas the team has. We need to like find a way to surface the ideas. And this is a few years ago. And it was like, are ideas our problem? Or are we like actually executing? Are we not, is there an execution problem? Like, is our development time taking too long, right? This is like from 4 years ago. When you actually broke it down, we didn't need to spend time getting more ideas. We needed to get the ideas we had develop quicker, right? So we could have spent a bunch of time trying to get more ideas, but it actually doesn't solve the problem. Those ideas would have just sat in inventory because we couldn't get them into production, right? And so I think ultimately like companies are just like all sorts of funnels, and so like yeah, I liked it because like a funnel is a process, is a system, and the goal was like just really good at seeing like okay, just focus on the biggest problem in any funnel, and then once you figure that out, constraint or the problem just moves elsewhere in the funnel, and then
Down.
you go solve that, and then you just keep solving that. So
Yeah, I
I
like that.
really, yeah, it was really good.
Yeah, I love that manager book, the one you were saying before. If you find out which one that was.
Yeah, I will share that.
Um, I know we have a few more minutes here. What are you noticing in the markets today? I'm shifting gears a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Um,
because you have really interesting data about probably it sounds like more enterprise than the consumer side, but I'd just be curious, like what obviously AI and chat GPT stuff. I'm wondering what are the things that people aren't noticing that you're noticing?
yeah, so I think the big thing, I'll break it down. There's sort of like the enterprise side, there's the investment side, and then there's the acquirer side. So on the enterprise side, like, 2015 to 2021, like it was all about new growth, right? It's like, hey, what new businesses are we going to add? Like, how are we going to drive more revenue, et cetera? Now it's become about how do I improve operations, get more efficient, like deal with risk, right? So it's like it's gone from like the revenue side to the expense side, right? And so when you're thinking about the technologies that are doing better in large enterprises today are often those that like will help them, save money, become more productive. And like in 2021, it was like, hey, we can add this new business opportunity to you, and you can go sell more of, ABC. So enterprise is just more cost conscious. That drives a lot of their technology decisions. So that's been one. On the investor side, I mean, it's just a tougher market, right? Like valuations have totally reset, which is good for if you're writing new checks, right? Because you're probably getting, companies at a better valuation, which can be good. I think a lot of the sort of tourists in startup land have probably shaken out, right? Like people who are just like startup founders because it was fashionable, like they're kind of realizing like, oh, this is harder than it looks, and I think some of those posers are probably washed out, which is a good thing. If you're an investor, I think the challenge though is if you have these companies that you funded in 2021 at 100 times, ARR, like that company may never grow into that valuation, right? And so what do what does that founder do? What do you do as an investor, right, with that company? It might be a solid company, but it just never grew into that sort of lofty mark that had been set. And so I think there's a lot of like, so you're seeing it now. There's more down rounds. There's going to be more company failures because there's just, folks are focusing on their best bets at this point. They're not going to just like, kind of spread the cheese on the pizza evenly the way they were in 2021. And then acquirers, it's the strategic. So there's two types of acquirers. There's like your financial sponsor, which is like your private equity, and then there's your strategics. And counterintuitively, you'd think like strategics are like, oh, this is the best time for me to acquire. I get the best deal, but their stock prices are down, so they're actually kind of risk off. Like they're not doing deals. And private equity is probably they're the ones who are probably the most acquisitive right now, but like they're also generally a pretty disciplined buyer, right? And like there's not all these quote synergies that they're going to get, so they're going to value you in like a really real way. And so I think there's a bunch of like late stage startups that private equity is probably going to go swoop in and pick up on the cheap because they're good companies that are sort of, we put out some data recently. I think like 86% of unicorns were still hiring, right? And like a grown headcount like in the last year, which is kind of shocking, right? You'd think like everybody got the memo like on cost containment and stuff, but clearly people haven't. And so I think private equity is going to swoop in and sort of fix these companies that are bloated and sort of overstaffed, and just going to say like, hey, listen, you've got, like, to your earlier comment about focus, this is working. Stop with all the science projects and like just get buckled down on this segment. So I think it's a good time to be in private equity. Investors, I think if you're disciplined, there's probably the best time to find good deals, but you got your existing portfolio you got to deal with, and then enterprises, it's just shifted more to let me cut costs and let me figure out how to improve operations, and not, I might not be looking at like autonomous robots and all the sci-fi stuff that I was looking at a couple of years ago. So yeah, it's just the tenor's definitely changed, I would say. And then within that, generative AI is like, if you're a founder listening to this, like, you should find a way to sprinkle that into your pitch deck, because it is the unlock for fundraising right now. It's like the one sub market that is flying, right? I think there's already 13 unicorns in generative AI, and no other segment is seeing that kind of growth. Like fintech, digital health, like all the darlings of the last few years are all like, they're all down. Yeah, Gen AI is definitely like the place. I think they're like, the challenge is like, it's there's lots of like brain power going to sexy ideas, and so there's going to end up being a shakeout. Like there's probably way too many Gen AI copywriting tools. There's way too many Gen AI travel planning tools, right? But like, these are like the problems that everybody's like, oh, I felt that problem, and then everybody goes and starts. I think like some of the less sexy generative AI stuff, like the folks that are doing generative AI to help lawyers and accountants and auditors, like that's probably where the returns are going to be if somebody figures those out. But that's like the smart people focused on unsexy problems is often like where there's some good outcomes. But yeah, a lot of the money flows into stuff that everybody has felt in their day-to-day life. And then, why can't TripAdvisor build that travel booking tool? Like there's really no reason that they can't. And we're seeing that in real time. Like Microsoft is moving really quick, right? Like as quick as startups, in some instances. So this idea that like big companies can't move quick, I think we're starting to see that that's actually not the reality. Yeah. And so, sometimes founders, like we, in our delusion or, arrogance or whatever we want to call it, are like, oh yeah, we'll just move quicker. And it's like, well, no, like look at the evidence right now. That's not the way it's working. So you actually need to have some fundamental insight, and not just like, well, we'll out execute big lumbering, slow ass company, because that doesn't seem to be the way it's working right now.
That's so interesting. It's very counterintuitive about the big companies, but yeah, they are moving quicker. Like, because back in the day, it was like, oh, they can't compete.
Yeah, exactly. And it's still a subset of them. It's still like your large tech companies, right? I'm not sure I'm not sure that the life insurers of the world are blazing any trails across the board here. But yeah, there's, the folks that we might think of as, who we can compete with, they do move really quickly. And so I think it's something to be mindful of. But there's going to be some really interesting, like the co-pilots, right? Like there's, the code development co-pilots that GitHub's made, but there's going to be, co-pilots for doctors, for lawyers, for all sorts of other trades that I think are going to be pretty compelling. And we're seeing some stuff there, but that requires domain knowledge, that requires dealing with regulatory. But like, if you can build businesses there, like that's where there is potentially some sort of moat. So I think, it's an interesting time. Generative AI is like definitely caught everybody. It's been cool. Even at CB Insights, we're using it. It's like the one hype. It's the one hype technology that I'd say like is actually, I feel, is real, right? Like we never got into the NFT thing. We've kind of like, we've been generally gun shy on all these things, and this is the one that I feel like is got some legs to it. But that's been good. And then lots happening outside of the US. I think that's the other thing, is like there's a lot of innovation in tech that's coming from around the world, and places that just like didn't have infrastructure, that sort of leapfrog infrastructure that we had, right? Like, if you, this is a trite example, but like Africa and India, like they didn't have landlines. They just went right to mobile phones, right? And so that you see that again and again in these markets where they didn't have bank branches. They moved right to mobile banking, right? And so I think there's concepts now that it's not all the innovation in the world comes from Silicon Valley, as much as folks might like to believe that. Like it's now, you'll see really compelling, interesting things, like live streaming shopping. Like that's actually kind of more of a China thing than it is a US thing. And now that's floating back to the US. And so I think there's interesting things that one can learn by observing markets that are much further from where we are that we continue to track.
Is there business ideas that you would do if you weren't doing CB Insights? Like at AppSumo, similarly, we promote a lot of software, so you kind of start seeing like we saw Writer Tools about a year ago, if not
Yeah.
longer. They were like exploding, and now it's definitely like people have the tool or they have the one they like, and the image thing as well. Any areas that you're curious about or you'd recommend for people to explore? Sounds like AI. There's areas still.
Yeah. I mean, data is the kind of thing that I look at, right? And so I look at data businesses, right? And so I think my framework for data businesses um, is it like a high consideration purchase, right? Is it opaque, right? Like where the information is just not out there on the web, um, and where there's frequency of purchase, right? And so like we launched this thing where we're like uh, interviewing software buyers, right? And so there's not good information about purchase price of software and what people think about them. It's generally like I'll ping Noah and be like, hey, what do you think about XYZ, right? But at enterprises, like they rely on peers a lot. And so I think that's a framework that I use, right? I'll give you one that I don't think I'd ever launch, but I think like I felt this pain, like, uh, and I think it's a data company at its core, is like TripAdvisor for summer camps, right? Like, exactly like kids. And it's like, it's a pain in the ass to go find summer camps and you go talk to your friends. I'm like, why can't you just go and say, like, I want a science based summer camp that's sleepaway, that's in this area where, like, it's got, this star rating, like that, I think would be cool. I don't think I mentioned it once on Twitter. A bunch of people said that like we're starting it. I haven't seen anything that's at scale. So that's one. The other one that I like, and these are unrelated to CBI, is I think like somebody who starts like a WeWork for like remote team gatherings could do well. So it's like people
Mm.
aren't in offices, and like our leadership team gets together, I don't know, every 6 to 8 weeks in some city, and it's a logistical, it's like somebody's doing it off their side of their desk and it's a lot of their time. But if you could just say like, hey, I've got 8 people, we're there for 3 days, we want to focus on like, you know, camaraderie, and like we need, a room with 3 whiteboards, and then we want to go hiking, and they're just like, oh yeah, like you can take a subscription to any one of our offsite locations. I think that would be cool. And I think that trend is growing as the office becomes less and less of a thing.
I
So
like
yeah,
that.
that'd be. I think if somebody was building that, I think that would do well, just given the secular trend towards remote work.
Yeah, I think there's some variance because of limitations and evolution. Like limitations of things are expensive. Like Airbnbs, I find very expensive, and then there's
Yeah,
limitations of how we're working, and depending on your age, if you have a family, and so there's some opportunity there. I'm not exactly there's Peer Space, which I think is renting out spaces, which is kind of that, um, but some
yeah,
opportunity.
yeah. I think the space thing is like that's like it's like the base layer of the problem, right? Like because you want that to be, and it might be just like, hey, we just want to have a fun offsite, right? Like it could just be that, and then like, okay, what does that mean? Like, is that wine tastings? Is that your style, or is it ATVs? Right? Like, what's the thing for your team? And like, it requires like it's actually to do it thoughtfully. It requires several people who's it's not their core day to day job, and so like having somebody who could do that, I think would be pretty killer. And I'm sure there's agencies and stuff that do it, but I just wonder if you could turn it into like a technology product and you could just charge a subscription for it. And it's like, hey, you have, access to 25 facilities and you can, book them in advance and stuff. But yeah, I'm busy with CBI, but if somebody's, if somebody's out there doing that, we might
Hell
become a
yeah.
customer.
Well, the last thing I wanted to hear more from you, among other things. And it's been so cool to hear updates and how you guys are doing, and a lot of learnings. It's been great. That I appreciate you sharing. How has your marketing evolved? Because as I think about you and my, from the years past, it's been, content marketing has been your bread and butter for a lot of how you built the business. Can you share more what that is originally for you guys, and then how that looks today and the impact it's made?
Yeah, I mean, it's still like data-driven content is still like our number one thing, right? We put a lot out there on the web. We publish it through our newsletter, which goes out to 600,000 some odd folks. So I think that's our number one way. But as the company's grown, like we're more full stack, right? So we do paid, Google and Bing and LinkedIn and all that stuff. And then we've got, we spend a fair amount of time on SEO, just because we've got a lot of content about these companies and their relationships and whatnot. And so we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that SEO traffic is kind of going up and we're getting people's eyeballs on those. But yeah, at the core, like, it's like we've always tried to build trust with the content that we put out. And that content is either discovered by Google or it's discovered by media partners who will like, hey, I'm writing about generative AI. I need some statistics about what's going on there. And they'll come to us and then they'll pay us back via that link or that mention. So I'd still say that's the nucleus. And then we've kind of become like a more complete marketing organization by doing the other things that webinars and all the good stuff that have, a complete marketing team does. But yeah, I mean, yeah, like we don't do podcasts, we don't do YouTube. Like we definitely have stayed, even on content creation, it's been very text and graphics focused. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but that's just been like what we feel like we know best. And so we've kind of stuck to our knitting there.
How has that evolved though? Because I think originally it was a lot of blogging. Is it still as much blogging? Is it like you guys use your data, create content, and then just post everywhere? Is there certain areas working better?
Yeah, we don't really. I mean, we post it. We'll share it on the social channels, but we're not doing like a lot of cross posting and things. I'd say like if media or kind of influencers in our world reach out and say, "Hey, I'm writing this up on X. Can I get some data?" We'll certainly help them out. Um, but yeah, it is blogging. Still kind of most of it now is moving behind the paywall. So we used to give away a lot of it for free, and now we just last month said like we're going to move it all behind the paywall. So we'll still give, if it's a series of charts, we might give away the first chart, and then it's like, hey, if you want to read the rest, you got to go, get it. You got to be a customer, and then we push that out via the newsletter. Like the newsletter is still our number one way of creating awareness of what we do. So it's 630,000 folks, and then people like it and they forward it around, and so that continues to be the thing. I think, yeah, there was some time when we didn't focus on the newsletter as much as we should have, and again, like if I go back to that narrowing the focus, increase the quality, like we should have just doubled down on the newsletter like all day long.
And when you say double down, you mean the amount of subscribers? What specifically?
Yeah, like
Like
really
clicks?
focus on, I think we could have done more vertically oriented newsletters, right? Like we have a main newsletter, we have a digital health one, we have a retail one, we have a fintech one. Like we cover so many industries. We could have probably figured out ways of addressing more industries. And then, we're 5 days a week. There was a period where we cut down on the frequency. Like I think, but you don't want high frequency garbage content, right? You want high frequency for it to always be good. And so I think like increasing the frequency, if we could maintain the quality bar, would have also been the other thing I would do. And then just like keeping our tone. Like there was a period where we started playing it safe because like people were getting offended and like whatever, like it was always like ruffling some feathers, and we started getting a little vanilla, right? And so like we should have we should have doubled down on like, no, you're gonna like us or hate us, but like whether you like us or hate us, you're gonna have an opinion, right? And like there was probably like 18 months where we were just kind of like in the fear of like somebody being upset. It just became a boring newsletter, right? And so it's like we should have actually leaned into the fact that people didn't like certain elements and others loved it, and we should have just like made it more polarizing. And we actually, and I think we're going back to that, but like we played a little safe for a while, and that was, I would say that was a mistake.
How did how did you know to pay attention to it, or how did you realize like you were ignoring it?
Um, yeah, I mean, the thing is like, I get all the emails, the responses, and so I read them all. And like, you could tell like there was just a dip in response rate because like when you're not saying anything interesting, why is anybody going to respond to you? Right. And before, when you're saying something interesting, even if people are like just Looney Tunes writing you back with stuff that you're like, oh, this person's clearly off the reservation, you're like, at least it got a response, right? Or other people are just like, oh, I love that. That was great, right? You're like, okay, good. Like it's resonating, or it's like, it, it's like, yeah, it was just getting a response. And I saw that come down. And then I think candidly, like we'd send it. And like, I didn't, if you asked me, like, would I want to read it? The answer would have probably been no, right? Like,
That's a
and I
good
think like
barometer.
ultimately, yeah, like ultimately, like you got to write for one person, like as like whoever that person is in your mind's eye. That like if this person likes it, a lot of people will like it. And so I think we just got away from that. And we were like worried about like, oh, like you know this person said this bad thing before, and like people didn't like that, so we should remove the mention of them in the newsletter. And I'm like, this what we're talking about has nothing to do with that other thing, and like it shouldn't matter, right? Like it's relevant to this topic that we're talking about. And um, there's still certain things like that are like the certain like rails that I don't want to touch. Like when we anything we used to mention about politics, like was like that got like just bad. So I was like, there's like I don't want to ever go there. But yeah, it was just like it got a little vanilla, and so I think like that's yeah, like going back and doubling down on the things that like either get you rabid fans, right? And honestly, even the haters, like they tell everybody about it. So it's great, right? Like they're sending it to all their friends, being like, yo, look at this guy Anand, he's an idiot. And I'm like, amazing. Like at least now like 10 of your one of them might be like, oh, this actually is interesting, right? Uh, so yeah, I think like that would be the other thing that we should have doubled down on is just like just go a little bit harder in the paint sometimes when and not pull up and kind of try to take the easy way out.
Yeah. Now, reading The Big Leap, it basically is a book about that, where as you get success or as you get momentum, you will tend to potentially pull back a bit, and how to notice
Yeah,
it and not just be with it and then make decisions based on like intentionality and what you want.
yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think that's like the challenge of incumbency a little bit, right? Like as you get bigger, you're like, oh, I got to protect this. I got to protect this nut that I got, right? And you're like, now I got to take less risks. And so the things that got you here, you're like, those things go away, right? And so I think, yeah, like it's, we're by no means an incumbent, but like, when we had nothing, it was easy to go be stupid. When you get bigger, you're a little bit more worried about being stupid. And so, but I think like, kind of being weird and being stupid sometimes is a good thing.
Awesome. I do got to get going, and I appreciate you
Yeah.
chatting with me, dude. It was good seeing you, man. A lot of
Yeah.
also great
Likewise.
wisdom. It's good to see like how much you've grown and how you run the business. A lot of inspiration.
Cool. I appreciate that. Yeah, no, it's good. I still follow your stuff. Your content has continued to be your content in the early days, honestly, because I didn't know anything about a tech startup. And like, I remember reading your stuff and I was like, this guy's figured it out. So like, it was really good. So I'm still a fan. And yeah, the podcast has been great. And I listen regularly. So thanks for putting that
Oh,
good stuff
really?
out
Oh,
there.
wow,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. I love the millionaire stuff or the billion. I guess now you've moved on to billionaires. So, yeah, that stuff's been really good.
It's
The
been an
Kinko
evolution.
the Kinko's founder, that was a fire
Oh,
episode.
dude, he was
He was
phenomenal.
yeah, he was so good. He was just like he's like plain spoken, like
Straight.
no couching things. Yeah, he was excellent. So
More to come. All right, we'll keep with it. I'll hopefully maybe every few years, not every decade, we'll chat.
yeah, let's do that. Awesome. No, all right,
All
man.
right,
Take
brother.
care.
All right, let me stop it. Hold on for you. Peace.